how might donor-advised funds make giving more sustainable?
Ad hoc responsive giving is just by nature not sustainable. There's 70 some million people with a 401k in the United States. Every single one of them should have a DAF. There's no reason that they shouldn't have a DAF. I bet almost all of them make at least one donation every year. It would make sense for every single one of them to have a DAF. And if they did, there would be drastically more giving happening in the United States.
Mitch Stein, welcome to the Sustainable Giving Podcast.
Thank you for having me, Dave.
Super glad to have you. And we're going to talk about a topic today that I think has really been certainly increasing on the radar when it comes to philanthropy. But I think it's one of the most interesting shifts, I think, that we see where generosity is sitting and how it actually gets deployed. And one of the things that I think is increasingly critical for nonprofit leaders to think about, be aware of when it comes to gifts from donors, not just major donors now, but general donors, is donor-advised funds. And you and I are going to talk about that in a little bit, but I would love, before we go there, you've been really at the front edge of a lot of innovation in that space. Tell me a little bit about your path into this corner of philanthropy. Like, what a specific space to end up. How'd you get there?
Yeah, certainly nothing too linear or intentional, but the pieces did all seem to fall together over time. So I actually started my career out in feels like a former life now at this point, but I was an investment banker at Goldman Sachs for 7 years. So started off in a couple different areas in finance. But also while I was there, I joined the company team on a charity bike ride event called the Northeast AIDS Ride, and started to really aggressively fundraise for my coworkers, and many of whom, especially the more senior people, had donor-advised funds. And the process through which they would donate to my ride was like a 12-step. I would send them an email with like 10-part instructions. They would then send it to an assistant to put into their portal, and then they'd follow up and ask me more questions, and then they'd tell me it was sent, and then I'd tell the organization it was coming, and then they'd reach back out to me when the check arrived to say, hey, this name's slightly different, is this the right person? And then they'd reach back out to the assistant. And that sounds like I'm exaggerating, but I would do that over and over and over again, but they were for $10,000, $5,000 gifts, so, it was worth it. So I always had that in the back of my mind as like, this is crazy. Moments. And then fast forward to 7 years in, I ended up leaving, still inspired by everything I was doing on the nonprofit fundraising side in my personal life. Decided to start a technology company helping nonprofits. It was a marketplace to match nonprofits with vendors and services that they needed that were specific to nonprofit needs. It was a company called Pond. So I founded that and worked on that for about 3 years. Had a lot of exciting things happen, but ultimately just wasn't seeing the scale we needed to be sustainable. Speaking of sustainability on this podcast. So like so many entrepreneurs, ended up having to close that first business, but in the process met the team at Chariot. And when they told me about what they were doing, I was like, oh my God, I've experienced this exact problem where someone is inspired to give and they set all this money aside specifically for giving. It can all be used for giving. And yet they have to choose credit card or Apple Pay if they want to give in that moment on that page to that person that inspired them to give. And so I was just really drawn to that mission and started working with them part-time, and then joined full-time as one of their first full-time hires. And here we are 3 years later, and the market has just exploded around DAFs, and we've continued to innovate around that space as it becomes no longer, like you said, a niche category, but really a core and central tenet of fundraising these days.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, so many threads. And I, by the way, my background really originally was in what we didn't call digital fundraising 20 years ago. We called new media because that was the catchy phrase. But so many similarities between just the logistics were just problematic to give. Like, I won't ask how you are, but I remember thinking, there's no way I'm going to put my credit card information into this nonprofit's website. Like I've been a web developer. I don't trust that. Right. And obviously over time, the financial institutions around donation platforms and CRMs and Stripe and whoever else, right, came around and ultimately made what was a distrustful, clunky process something that was actually smooth. And we're going to get into that, but let's level set first for our audience. So let's not assume people know. I mean, DAFs, people, throw that acronym around, right? Donor advised funds. So just level set for us. What is a donor advised fund and how do donors step into it?
Yeah, and I always, whenever I speak on this topic at conferences, I do a lot of traveling around the country to speak with nonprofit leaders about this. I always start off with two questions. One is hands up for how many people know what a DAF is. Over the past 2 years since I've done that, a considerably larger percentage of people raising their hands. But then the follow-up question I always ask is, who here would be comfortable explaining what a DAF is to a donor? And then almost everyone's hands go down. So even if you think you know what it is, if you can't say yes to that second question, still a good thing to revisit and use it as like training that you can kind of take my cues for how you might explain it to a donor. But a donor advised fund is a tax advantaged account for charitable giving. It is kind of like your 401k is to your retirement savings, or maybe an HSA, a health savings account, is to your healthcare costs. A DAF is to your philanthropy. It's tax advantage. It has restricted use, and the funds can be invested while they're in the account. So they are growing over time. Functionally, how that works is that you contribute into the donor advised fund. You are at that point in time relinquishing control of that money. You are technically donating it to the DAF sponsor, which is also a 501c3, charitable group. So you get to write off that contribution, the full amount, in your taxes that year where you made it. Then you can make grants out of the DAF account over time, and the assets that are in the account are invested in the market so that they are growing the market over time. There are some important restrictions and differences from those other examples I gave, like a 401k. First and foremost, there's no takesies backsies with a DAF. It is a irrevocable commitment that money can never come back out. It doesn't matter if you wanted to buy a boat that year and you want to pull some funds out and pay a penalty. It's not possible. The only way that money can leave your account is as a donation to a qualified charity. And you are technically always making recommendations to the DAF sponsor because you are a what? Advisor. That's why it's called a donor advised fund. So you can advise, and practically speaking, as long as the gift is to an eligible organization that falls under whatever rules or guidelines the DAF sponsor has, and it's for an eligible purpose, like you're not trying to use your DAF to buy some event tickets or something like that, then they will accept your recommendation and send the money on to the nonprofit. So that's how I describe the core function.
That's so helpful. And the purpose is in the title, right? Donor advised fund. So there's a fund the donor is giving to, and the donor loses quote unquote control, AKA they've donated the money, but they're still the donor. It's a donor advised fund. And so that they can recommend grants to the charities that they're giving to. That's super helpful. I love the idea of, or thinking about it as like, well, you've got your 401k, that's an account. You've got your health savings account, your HSA. I had a friend of mine describe a donor advised fund as imperfect analogy, but I thought it was helpful as kind of like a charitable checking account. But the thing about it, and actually I kind of love this about DAFs, is it's already committed. Like it's given. Like there's, to your point, you can't be like, well, finances are tight this year. I'm gonna, use my charitable checking account to pay the bills. Like, nope, that's not how that works. You've already donated the money. And so now this money, I mean, how much right now is estimated to be in DAFs that's sitting there already donated, but ready to be distributed to charities?
Yeah. Well, first, before you answer that question, I was just say the one thing I'd clarify with the checking account analogy is that it's almost always like immediately invested in the market in some type of mutual fund, exchange traded fund. So you also getting the pickup from market growth, and it grows tax free. So a lot of people talk about the triple tax advantage of a DAF. that comes from what we already described, which is being able to write off that full contribution in year one. But you can also be contributing appreciated assets, which is actually very common, and a majority of contributions by dollar volume to DAFs are in the form of appreciated securities. And then they grow tax-free in the account. So when you donate that appreciated share of NVIDIA stock, you get to write the full amount off your taxes and avoid any capital gains taxes that you would have paid if you'd sold it in the open market.
Yeah.
And so it's just a really efficient way to move assets into a charitable account that's easy to then distribute as cash grants to nonprofits. You're not trying to like break up your NVIDIA shares and send to different nonprofit organizations. The DAF handles all that essentially. And so as you might imagine, with the stock market ripping over the past 10 years, there's a lot of candidates for these appreciated assets that people are more strategic about contributing to their DAF. So these numbers are lagging, which is frustrating to people like me and you that are very focused on data and real-time updates. But the total market figure, the latest numbers we have are for the end of 2024. There was over $326 billion already in donor advised funds accounts. Like you said, it's already committed. It can only be used for giving. So I think about that as taking a huge step forward towards donating. And it's funny because a lot of people will say things like it's locked up or it's trapped in DAFs. No, it's moved out of their private investment accounts with no commitment to giving into a fund that they have to use for giving. And so I think cheering more and more people moving more and more of their private assets into DAFs as a benefit, as long as we see the throughput that they are being really actively engaged and utilized for grant making and growing their giving over time, which we have tons of evidence on.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah, when you think about donor advised funds today versus DAFs when you first started connecting with the folks at Chariot, and we'll talk about Chariot in a minute, but how has that evolved?
Well, yeah, I mean, think even back to 2016 when I started my bike ride fundraiser on the Northeast AIDS Ride. It was partners at Goldman Sachs that had donor advised funds. Now there's over 1 million people that are using donor advised funds, and at somewhere like Fidelity, which is the largest DAF in the country. By the way, their 2025 numbers just came out, and they granted over $18 billion to nonprofits in 2025 from their DAF accounts.
Wow.
Wild. They have hundreds of thousands of accounts, and the median account size is $25,000, roughly. So still a donor that you really want to cultivate and have, but it is very much moved into more the mass affluent and more especially in the mid-level donor base, adopting DAFs for their giving. But you see giving up and down the donor spectrum. I mean, we do a report called the DAF Fundraising Report every year with our partners at K2D Strategies. So we're just starting to collect data for year 3. But last year, we looked at, of the 400,000 DAF gifts that were part of our data set from participating nonprofits over the course of 5 years, the 69% of the individual DAF donations were less than $1,000.
Okay, so of all of the grants, almost 70% were under $1,000. What do you make of that?
To me, that means 2 things. One, that donors of all stripes and sizes find benefit from using a donor advised fund. We can talk about how those benefits vary depending on your wealth level or your engagement with philanthropy. But number 2 is even the big donors want to use their DAF for all the times that they give. So I think it's a nuanced, like 2-part misconception. One is that only really wealthy people use DAFs. 2 is that those people only want to make big gifts with their DAF and they'd rather just use a credit card for smaller things like their friend's birthday campaign or whatever. No, you set this money aside, got all these tax advantages. That would be like walking into a store with a $10,000 gift card and being like, no, sorry, I don't want to use that here. I'd rather put this on my credit card. Like, does not make sense. And yet people do it. And that's a fascinating thing to dig into from like a human psychology perspective, is like you have this advantaged pool of funds you already set aside, and yet you continue to make credit card donations. Why? So I think there's more to dig into there, but I think that's the big piece, is don't underestimate who might have a DAF and when and where they want to use it.
Ooh, that's good. Don't underestimate who. It's kind of like the reminds me of the Millionaire Next Door. People talk about major gifts fundraising, but don't underestimate who has a DAF and when and where they want to use it. We're going to talk about when and where they want to use it next. But before we go there, I just want to kind of accentuate what I'm hearing. So number one, it's not just the wealthy anymore. Number two, there is a tax kind of advantage here. A tax, this triple tax benefit you talked about, the contribution, being able to donate something that would otherwise be taxed as an appreciated asset, and the account can actually grow over time tax free. That's really powerful. Talk a little bit about just, we don't need to make this like a tax policy conversation because I will fall asleep, but how has some of the like increased standard deduction and some of the things that have been happening just in broader charitable giving from a tax perspective, do you think, is that driving or popularizing the use of donor advised funds?
Yeah. There's two pieces there that I'll share that aren't super dry and boring tax policy stuff, but very relevant to people. One's more like historical. In 2017, with the first Trump administration tax changes, you mentioned increasing the standard minimum deductions. That was a big change, where the standard minimum deduction increased dramatically to the point that I think it's like 5% of people were actually itemizing after that increase, which meant if you're not itemizing, even if you're donating a few $1,000s a year, you don't actually see any tax benefit for it. And so a lot of people have been speaking to how that has decreased the incentive for more everyday donors to make sure that giving is a part of their finances. In 2017, what that resulted in and the following years is a lot more people, especially those working with their financial advisors, who were helping them game plan what this change means for you. And so they're saying, hey, you used to donate $10,000 a year to charity, roughly on average, and you got that tax benefit. Now, with this new standard minimum deduction, you two filing as a married couple, you're not going to see any benefit of that. But what if this year we decided to, you maybe sold a house, you got a bonus, you have some appreciated stock holdings that did really well this year? Could we put $50,000 into a DAF, get you that full tax benefit now, and then you do your $10,000 of giving each year for the next 5 years? And that is a process called bunching. That became very popular among folks on the cusp for itemizing or not with respect to their charitable giving. And that continued through that 8-year period. Then we got to this past year where there was another tax overhaul. The very high standard minimum deduction did not change, but there were two other changes relevant to DAFs. One is that now they brought back like an above the line deduction for charitable giving, where an individual person can deduct up to $1,000, but they can't deduct it if it was a contribution to their DAF. So it basically means that any person, whether they use a DAF or not, is probably incentivized to do up to $1,000 of giving directly outside of their DAF, which is kind of an interesting dynamic. $2,000 for a married couple. But on the other hand, it also lowered the upper threshold of deductibility, which is mostly like impacts very wealthy donors. And I talking about it in broad strokes because ultimately I don't think the changes impacted that many people in their DAF and giving strategy. But the corporate changes were much bigger, but not as relevant here. But it was a talking point for financial advisors to say, hey, there's a tax change. Don't you want to talk about how this might impact you and think about your giving? And so from all of the DAF sponsors that we speak with on a regular basis and all these folks that are reporting their results that are coming out this week from year end, astronomical growth in Q4. And everybody attributed it to, oh, everyone was paying attention to this because there are these tax changes. Even if ultimately the tax changes weren't that different from the situation before, prior, it was like, set this up before everything changes. And that was really effective in at least drawing attention to this tool for anyone who had kind of missed the boat so far. And so what matters to this conversation related to that is people are flush with money in their DAF, like ready to go, right? They set this up, and let's make sure they're using it and having a good experience to continue using it and investing in it going forward.
Perfect segue. I want to talk about, what does it look like? If there's $326 billion that's essentially already been donated, is ready to be dispersed, to charities doing good work, how do we unlock that? And actually, perfect segue to talk a little bit about Chariot, and specifically, I want you to talk about the organization, but also DAF Pay, which is, I understand it, the primary product, so to speak. Recently, DAF Pay as a instrument was actually honored as one of Time Magazine's best inventions of 2025, which I thought was fascinating. By the way, I fell down a deep rabbit hole of the other best inventions of 2025. I will not give you an exhaustive list, but it was involved humanoid robots, giant telescopes, new agriculture tech, and a plethora of consumer electronics. And DAF Pay was actually one of those Time Magazine best inventions of this last year. So talk about, a 10-year overnight success, right? Why is DAF Pay a great invention, like an invention worthy enough of Time saying like, hey, we should probably pay attention to this?
Yeah, and the funny story there is with most of these things, I think people assume they're like pay to play or that you apply to them and whatever. I got messages in my spam folder that were from this like quote unquote reporter from Time. And I was like, whatever, this is bogus. We get this still all the time. No way. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to reach out. And then I looked at his LinkedIn and I was like, actually, it says he's a contributing writer to Time. Okay. Talked to him and he was like, yeah, usually people apply, but we always try to find some interesting things ourselves. And so anyway,
I love that.
Just a little bit of context there that it was genuinely a discovery on their part, which I think speaks to how quickly it has become more ubiquitous as a payment option on donation forums to get that kind of recognition. So for folks who don't know, Chariot started out to solve that problem I mentioned at the very beginning. Someone has a donor advised fund. It's their philanthropic dollars. It's their tax advantage money they want to use. And then they get sent to a donation form by any kind of email or ad or anything that's encouraging them to give. And they can't use their DAF there. They need to leave, go log into their portal, basically like open their bank account, then try to look up the organization, go back to the website, figure out what their EIN is. They can confirm, answer a bunch more questions. It's like several extra minutes. So anyone in digital fundraising knows that that is not good when it comes to friction and conversion of your donors. Not to mention the fact that if they don't use their DAF, they're likely making a much smaller donation. And you have no idea that they have a DAF, which is your best indicator that this person is a high value, high potential donor and likely has a lot more capacity to give beyond that one gift. So the team at Chariot built out DAF Pay. It's like Google Pay or Apple Pay, where you're in a checkout form, ready to donate, inspired to give, and you are able to check out with your donor advised funds in 3 clicks. It's even faster than going through a credit card checkout. So you open it, log into your specific DAF provider, submit your details all within the DAF Pay window. That gets recorded into the nonprofit system, similar to a credit card gift. Gets submitted to the DAF provider. The money gets sent, and the nonprofit attaches it to the grant that was recorded in their system on the front end. So it has unlocked a wave of digital DAF giving, a new category really of fundraising where someone can use their DAF in an integrated fashion within your pre-existing fundraising experiences that you've put so much time and effort into, as opposed to just being going off on their own and something that you don't get to observe or have insight on. So that's important. It gets people to use their DAF when they otherwise would have used their credit card or not given at all. It gets people to actually make larger DAF gifts because we show them their total account balance at checkout and then give them easy buttons to add to their donation. So it's like, you were going to make $100 gift, but actually you have $100,000 in your DAF. So we find that about 20% of people end up increasing their gift size once they're reminded of the balance, which is a fascinating human psychology tidbit. And then the last piece is that we record their name and email for you. They share that with you through DAF Pay so that you know right away who this donor is, how to get a hold of them, and start stewarding them to build a relationship. Because that's the number one complaint from fundraisers about DAF giving is these gifts show up, but I don't actually know who it's from or how to get a hold of them.
So the charity actually gets the sort of gift information as far as who the donor is or what the fund is. Is that right?
Yes, who the donor is, what the fund is, and what their email is, which you almost never get when the gifts just arrive.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I think ironically, I feel like you undersold how bad it is to give, how hard it is to give a traditional DAF gift without DAF Pay. So let me illustrate, because I am one of those mid-level donors that set up a DAF, and so we've gone through this actually recently as a family. And I was like, wait a second, everybody, it's 2026. Like, what is going on here? You mean to tell me that I got to go find the charity, to your point, and I have to go look up their EIN number, which, pro tip, make sure that your EIN number is on your donation page or on the footer of your website, right? I got to find that. I've got to go through this arduous process. And then you're going to write a check. Like, you're going to mail a physical in 2026, fancy financial institution, you are going to mail a physical check to the charity with a cover letter that hopefully has enough information, right, that to tie it to, who the donor was. I was just like, no way. There's no way that I wouldn't be able to, to give an online gift as if, like normal people have for the last 20 years. And so DAF Pay, the thing I love about it is that ability to not only just have like a special place on the website where a donor advised fund donor, with whatever their balance is, can give, but also I love that you've integrated it actually into that kind of like checkout process. And does that kind of get added on depending on what the nonprofit's donor platform is, or it kind of depends on which donor platform they're on?
Yeah, good question. So the primary way that nonprofits access this is similar to how they access Google Pay, Apple Pay, PayPal, any other payment method, is through their existing fundraising platform. So we just crossed 75 different platform partners that natively offer a DAF Pay as an integrated payment option, meaning that the organization doesn't need to do any extra technical work or pay for a new contract or anything. They just use it like any other payment option. That's the ideal. If your fundraising platform does not yet do that, you should bother them and tell them to work with us, because it's very straightforward and dozens of their peers and competitors are doing it already. And then we have some clients that either like manage their own forms or for whatever reason they want direct access to the API and the button and implement it into their website directly or forms directly. But the vast majority of folks simply enable DAF Pay as one of the payment options on their fundraising platform. So super accessible.
Yeah, I love it. Well, I think accessibility is the theme of this conversation, because 10 years ago was not accessible to even as a financial instrument, so to speak. And then today, arguably without a DAF Pay, it's also not accessible because it's just clunky and hard to use. Like, to your point, and I think your point about donors want to give their gifts out of their DAF because they literally already gave that money. It's ready to be distributed. And so if they can't give that $50 gift or that $100 gift, let alone the $10,000 gift, you're just getting in the way. And so I love the fact that you're invested in that, because we want to see that $326 billion actually moved into missions. If you're a nonprofit leader thinking seriously about the future of recurring giving, I want to take just a moment to share a resource with you. My book, The Rise of Sustainable Giving, is now available as an audiobook, narrated by me and designed for leaders who want to grow sustainable, recurring revenue in today's subscription economy. This book brings together 2 decades of working with charities, deep research into the subscription economy, and practical frameworks for building recurring giving programs that last. Whether you're just getting started with monthly giving or you're looking to take an existing program to the next level, this audiobook is meant to meet you where you are on a walk, in the car, or between meetings. And even if you've already read the print edition, many leaders are finding that listening to the book helps them hear the ideas differently and spot new opportunities. You can find The Rise of Sustainable Giving audio edition wherever you listen to audiobooks. If you care about growing generosity that's sustainable for your donors, your organization, and your mission, I hope you'll give it a listen. Okay, so let's step away from some of the technicals, both the tax and the literal digital technicals. And what if we, I was thinking about this, what if we stopped thinking about DAFs as, a tax vehicle and started thinking of them as infrastructure? So I'm curious, what changes, what role might DAFs play, or that you already see? What role do you see DAFs playing in the future of generosity?
Oh, I love that because it's such an underestimated element of the rise of DAFs and people who use them. Since you have one, you'll understand everything that I'm going to describe here, and or can correct me if you feel differently. But in general, I like to remind people that when humans are very bad at making decisions, decisions are exhausting to us. Even if it's a subconscious decision, it slows us down. And anytime someone is prompted to give, they are simultaneously making 2 decisions. One is a budgeting decision, and the second is an allocating decision. So first, they are thinking, how much money do I want to part with right now? And 2, do I want to support this cause or organization? The first one is a bit of a negative, right? You're like parting with your money. That's just generally net. You'd rather not do that, all else being equal. The second piece is really positive. It's the joy of giving. You're supporting something you care about, all the good feels. But those are kind of tugging against each other. And that creates friction and slows people down. With a DAF, you are pre-committing that money irrevocably to giving. So you are kind of forcing yourself to take that budgeting decision out of the equation. I'm saying at the beginning of the year that I'm going to put $5,000 into my DAF account, 10,000, 50,000, whatever your number is. And that's my budget for giving. Then when Dave messages me because he's doing the heart walk, it's like, oh man, no brainer. Oh, I've been waiting for someone to ask me to give some money because I already set it aside and I have to use it for this. I can't do anything else with it. So you've kind of removed the friction of the budgeting aspect that like affects my month to month budget. And I'm solely focused on the joy of giving. And so it really transforms your in the moment response to solicitations, to crises happening when you feel like helpless. There's a natural disaster. There's something happening in Minneapolis. There's something that you want to go make a difference. You have this ready store of funds to do just that. So it fundamentally changes your psychology in the moment of giving, and proactively, because of what I was saying earlier, it forces you to make that decision. You're deciding what your commitment to giving is. And doing that proactively makes people really re-examine their giving. So yes, they're going to use that money for those inspiration-based moments, things that come up, friends reaching out, etc. But it also forces you to think, well, how much do I want to give? What do I care about? What do I want to support? In a way that is totally different than like, yeah, I'd like to give more.
Yeah.
Like, I bet if you surveyed all adults, would you like to donate more to charity? I have to imagine the majority of people would say, oh yeah, because it's like the nice thing to do. Okay, we'll take this giant commitment step forward. And now what? Right? And so it really changes your own accountability and makes giving feel more like an investment versus a one-off, something responsive or passive.
I'll give you just a personal example. When we made the decision to set up the DAF, one of the things we talked about was actually kind of the fun part of having this, decent size pot of money already set aside so that when the causes we care about have some special circumstance, or for whatever reason something happens, to your point, and you're just like, oh, we can actually mobilize more giving than we would have traditionally in the like credit card and check kind of mode. And so I think that's one of the biggest transitions, and I think the last few years have been kind of this combination of awareness and like normalizing, for lack of a better term, this kind of behavior. I think we're still just shy of that. That's why I'm so excited about the future. But to your point, like what happened this last year end with the tax policy changes, even though many of them were actually not too different from 8 years prior to that, people are still starting to get it and starting to realize like, oh, this could be for me too. But that idea of removing sort of the friction part, the almost the negative emotional part of parting with your income, so to speak, and only leaving the joy of giving is really powerful. I hadn't thought about it that way.
Yeah, and to your point, you mentioned one example of what that fund does for you and your partner, or maybe even your family. Um, but it also, I hear of so many people, especially when they're doing it jointly with a family member, with their family, is that you can set up like a recurring meeting every month, every quarter. We sit down over dinner and we talk about where we want to get. I've heard of people doing it where their kids come and like pitch them on like, hey, I love penguins and I found this organization that helps penguins, and so that's where I want my $100 a month to go, whatever it is. And kind of training people and training your kids to prioritize and really engage thoughtfully with philanthropy. So it's just such a cool tool and vehicle for more intentional and engaged giving.
I love that. By the way, that will be happening in the Rayleigh family household. So thanks, Mitch. Um,
I want to hear
this
the
pitch.
pitch, please.
I do. I want to hear the pitch too. I have a 15-year-old and a 12-year-old, so their pitches are usually for like dogs and stuff. So I'm game for the philanthropy pitch.
When I was 12, I did like a fake stock portfolio, and it was 50-50 Krispy Kreme and Disney.
Ooh.
The two things that I
Yeah, I was
was
gonna say
most
both
important
of
to me.
those, depending on the time. I timed the Disney one would have worked out. Not now, but that's a separate conversation you and I can have offline. So how might donor advised funds make giving more sustainable in the sector?
Right. So we need to bring it back home to the topic of the podcast. Yeah, I mean, I think ad hoc responsive giving is just by nature not sustainable, right? It's not an intentional, habitual part of people's lives. It's reliant upon the solicitation cycle. It's reliant upon like urgency, false urgency in many situations, creating deadlines, matches, etc., as opposed to people planning and proactively managing their money to incorporate giving. That if there's 70 some million people with a 401k in the United States, every single one of them should have a DAF. There's no reason that they shouldn't have a DAF. I bet almost all of them make at least one donation every year within their household. It would make sense for every single one of them to have a DAF. And if they did, there would be drastically more giving happening in the United States. So to me, sustainability is about like the structure. You called it infrastructure. I totally agree. To have the tools that just make it a part of someone's life, make it a part of their finances, um, because that just turns the model on its head that nonprofits have been utilizing, and just seeing lower and lower returns on the like hounding donors for money, um, in the more traditional sense, where they see their like participation rates kind of going down, 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 down over a long period of time, buoyed by the fact that some donors are giving more money. But that is definitely not sustainable. So to me, it's about the structure and the intentionality, making giving a part of people's lives.
How much of I don't know if you have percentages on this, but one of the things about donor advised fund grants, just to very straightforward, is a lot of them are um, recurring distributions. They're monthly, quarterly, et cetera. Do you have any sense of what that looks like?
Yeah, so there isn't like a national figure for the full market, but individual DAF providers will disclose how much their grants are recurring. DAF Giving 360, which is formerly Schwab Charitable, so the second largest DAF provider in the country, they just reported their 2025 numbers, and it was over a third of their grant recommendations were set recurring. Fidelity also, they haven't released their full report for last year yet, but they typically disclose a bucket of recurring and reoccurring, meaning someone made a grant to the same organization one year after the next, and it's like more than 2/3, so a significant portion. So I do think that as while the portals aren't the best for looking at an organization and submitting a new grant, it is very good for people to have a place to go and see all their giving, as opposed to like digging through credit card statements in emails to figure out where they made all their donations last year.
Right.
They've got a consolidated list there, which makes it easy to like click regrant to the same place. And so I think that is a key reason that it results in more sustained giving. Now, a couple problems in this area that are worth discussing. One is that nonprofits in general have done a really, really bad job of stewarding these donors. Now, it's not all their fault, but the experience is not ideal if you don't ever hear back from them, or it takes a year for you to hear back from the organization to thank you. And yet, we found in the DAF fundraising report that retention rates for DAF donors were like 13 points higher than non-DAF donors.
Huh.
So I think it's, my theory is because of that like portal mechanism where it's rather easy to see year to year where you gave last year and initiate that grant again. But also just speaks, that could be way higher if organizations were able to effectively steward those donors. Because a lot of people, so you talk about recurring specifically, a lot of people with monthly giving, sustainer giving programs, like they've branded it, they have a whole communication plan every month, they send these emails and perks and whatever. If someone sets up a monthly recurring gift from their DAF, we'll never hear from you again. Like they're completely disconnected.
You're not stewarding them.
Because it's hard to recognize, oh, we see this donor as a gift that does come in once a month, but no one on our team is connecting the dots to say, oh, plug them into the giving sequence that we're running because it didn't come in through your donation form. So I think on the gift processing and like data management side, there's a huge opportunity to bring these two things together. Chariot just released a new platform called our gift processing platform, where you can more easily direct and manage all of your gift processing work within the Chariot system, so that you can better connect those dots for recurring gifts and other types of like coding and organizing these like offline gifts coming in from DAFs and workplace giving. So I think that helps, but you have to be paying attention. You have to have a plan around it and identify the problem and then figure out some ways to solve for it.
Yeah, and we work on this very topic with the organizations we consult with around sustainable giving. And I want a couple principles for our listeners to take away. Number one, your DAF donors are recurring donors too. And in fact, depending on what you look at, 1/3 to 2/3 of them are actually, have elected to make a recurring grant to your organization. And we need to figure out how to treat them as such. So just because you have a great program, to your point, if they are in that sort of, they're giving through their DAF, how do we make sure we're identifying those individuals and then treating them accordingly? Because, and I just led our sustainable giving workshop for a couple dozen organizations this last week here in Seattle. And one of the things we talked about is that 97% of the value of your recurring donors comes in after the first gift. And I would assume, I don't know what the percentage is, probably not too different with a first recurring DAF gift or first DAF gift. And if you knew that was recurring and you knew that 97% of the value of that donor eventually would be through those recurring gifts, then maybe you would steward them. And you would think,
Wow. I love that. Has my mind spinning on how we could incorporate something like that into the DAF fundraising report this year. Because something we do look at is if someone previously gave with a credit card and then switched to giving with a DAF, what is the value to your organization?
Oh, yeah.
The average is a 10x increase in their giving once they use their DAF. And it makes sense to people who have a DAF because you've done this calculus, right? Your friend hits you up for a donation. You're thinking, okay, yeah, I'll give you $20. Oh, but I can use my DAF. I'd give 200, right? Because it's like my charitable fund money.
Yep.
And so it's interesting how many donors I've heard voice that 10x calculus and seeing that reflected in the data. And even the median, because obviously averages are evil in the statistics world, because it can be very skewed. Although in these cases, like those large outliers are very real and like do happen. So I think it's worth including them. But even when you look at something like the median increase when someone changes the way they give from credit card to DApps, it's the median is double. So that means over half of those converted donors are at least doubling their support just for your organization once they use their DApp instead of the credit card.
Wow. I think I would love to see that in the next report. You and I should talk offline about if there's any way we can help with that, because I do think, increasingly, to your point, donors want to use, if they want to use their DAF account, they've got that money. That's why it's there to be distributed. And so as we're seeing the subscription economy and what's happening with recurring giving, which is the trumpet that I've been playing, it's like these are very correlated things. And so I think our listeners should take away that, your DAF donors are recurring too. And let's steward them as such. I want to ask you just a couple questions as we kind of come towards a close here for now. If you were advising a nonprofit starting today and they're like, wow, I think I've heard about DAFs, or I've definitely heard about DAFs, but I've never even given a second thought to what I should do first. Just what would you recommend?
Yeah, I'd recommend doing something. Just do something. Take one step forward. Don't overwhelm yourself, and that can be different depending on where you're starting. It could be adding your EIN to the footer of your website, like Dave said earlier.
Yeah.
Like just ask to put yourself in the donor's shoes. This is always a good idea. Make a gift to your organization. See what the experience is like. What's the stewardship like? And do that for DApps, and you'll notice where there's some gaps and improvement for sure. I would say if you are kind of familiar with DApps and just wanting to sort of level up, I would think about establishing a DAF strategy. Like, don't have it just be a passive thing where gifts start showing up. Are you auditing your website and various communications, solicitations for mentioning donor advised funds? Really simple, small changes can remind people to use that DAF and make a much larger gift. And I think lastly, if you're up for it and you really want to learn more, get your own donor advised funds. Open your own account. Like if you donate charity, which I assume almost every fundraiser also donates to at least one charity a year, why not do it through a DAF? And then that's the best way to speak with donors on the topic, because you could speak from a personal place. That's always ideal. You can tell them about your own experience and relate to your donors. That's amazing. And again, you will understand, you'll see examples of nonprofits doing it really well and those that aren't, and set your organization apart so that those really high value donors want to keep coming back and supporting you more and more.
I will add, because I think it's important, is look at turning on or getting the DAF Pay button on your. If you're one of those 75 nonprofit donation platforms, if it's either not turned on by default or that's an option, turn that on, or look into getting that button on the website. It's not that difficult, and it I think it's a one way to pretty easily start to detect whether there are donor advised fund owners on your account, because to your point, if they give through that option, then now they'll show up in their Chariot account. So I think
Yeah,
that's
it's like
not that hard.
yeah, it's like it's like giving your donor the easiest way to tell you that they have DAF, by just like making it easier for them to use instead of having to ask the question. So that's a great point. And I'd also just add, we didn't get into it too much, but even just claiming your Chariot account, any DAF provider that's using our platform to actually send those disbursements will arrive electronically directly into your Chariot account
As
instantly.
opposed to the
So
yield check showing up in the mail. I'm like, wow, that's amazing.
yes,
I
as
love
Dave
that.
described. So lots of entry points that aren't big decisions or things that are expensive. Just take those steps forward to make improvement. And then I'd also just add, like, follow me on LinkedIn, check out our blog. We have so many resources, and I share probably more information than you'd ever thought you needed to know about DAFs on LinkedIn. So yeah, just plug in, start learning, start taking those steps forward.
Yep. Look up Mitch Stein. Should be pretty easy to spell. And then the organization is Chariot. But if you go to DAFPay, is it dafpay.com?
GiveChariot.com is our website for
Okay.
everything. Yeah.
Okay. Good. All right. Last question. It's been super fun to get to know you and just even, geek out about this topic. This is my happy place, Mitch. So kind of a two-parter. When you think about the future of generosity, what concerns you and what gives you hope?
Ooh, heavy questions. I would say what concerns me is if there's further pressure, intervention, meddling in the independence of the nonprofit sector. That's something that I think most people in the industry have been turning a much closer eye to in 2025 and now in 2026. Took a trip to Washington last winter to meet with a lot of offices on the Hill, on the Ways and Means Committee in the House and Senate Finance Committee, to advocate for nonprofits and make sure people recognize on both sides of the aisle the importance. So definitely a passion area of mine, and also pretty into politics, so I pay close attention to that. Feels like the noise has died down a little bit at this exact moment in time, but that does not mean it won't ratchet back up again in the future. So that's like a looming risk that keeps me up a little bit at night. But I would say what gives me hope is I feel this movement towards loneliness from people. We have all this technology and advances, and yet it's not necessarily bringing people closer together, which is such a core human need. And I deeply believe in generosity as an antidote to that trend, as an antidote to loneliness. And so I have hope that people will be reminded of that, discover that. And it's my goal to be a part of a movement that brings that to people and makes it fulfilling and connects them to community, connects them with each other by getting more involved in nonprofits and community organizations. And I feel like that's the way through as our lives get so disrupted by these different forces at play. That we just have to come back to each other. And that is what generosity is. So that's what gives me hope.
Love that. Well, you and I have some mutual connections in this world. Thinking of some recent guests we had on, Woodrow Rosenbaum and Chiri and Koshi, both in various ways, have talked about really generosity is a fundamental human trait, and so as much as I'm, like I said, I try not to get into tax strategy except for reading it and being like, wait a second, this feels like it's reducing generosity. Um, and yet at the end of the day, I do think that humans, fundamental trait is generosity. Sometimes it has to be discovered, and different cultures are different and they express themselves differently. But my hope is, as we see trends like this, even amidst some of the darker clouds, that you've got these kind of moments of like, interesting. Individuals decided on their own volition to set aside $326 billion to actually make a difference in the world. And they did so knowing they can't get that money back. And individuals are deciding to, support the causes that are closest to them on a recurring basis, right? And these decisions are happening. And so even as I think about this as a dad and as a professional in this space, I think, man, I'm looking forward to what the next kind of generation of generosity looks like, and I just appreciate you for putting yourself into that space and saying like, hey, how can we make this not just easier but more transformative?
Totally. More fulfilling, more engaged, and then ultimately solving the problems that nonprofits have set out to address, right? Like, not just, or yes, it's moving the generosity to achieving the visions that they have, right? Like, we don't need to think small, let's think really big. And that's what's motivating people. That's what makes that generosity satisfying. So it's all connected. And I feel us moving there with this like investment and intensity around the DAF growth. So I view it as all connected, and it has me very excited.
Love it. Well, Mitch, thank you for being on the show and just for investing in this sector.
Amazing. Thanks for having me, Dave.
Awesome. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Sustainable Giving Podcast. I hope you found the information helpful and that you're able to walk away with insights that you can use to start building a steady stream of recurring revenue for your organization. For even more resources to help you build a thriving recurring giving program, go online to sustainablegiving.org. That's sustainablegiving.org. And lastly, if a leader comes to mind that you think would benefit from this episode, would you do me a favor? Would you share this episode with them? Just that little act could be the difference they need to start growing sustainable recurring giving for their own organization. Until next time, thanks for joining us.